Hi, and welcome to our next video on semantics and pragmatics. This week, we're going to talk about grammatical meaning. This is the beginning of the last thematical block that we're going to talk about in this semester on the other aspects of meaning. So in this video, there are going to be two big sections. The first one is a general discussion, a general introduction to what meaning does in grammar and what meaning does in the lexicon. The second part will then be a very brief case study on the development of the English verb will. All right. So now just a very broad introduction about what the difference between grammatical and lexical units in language are. We can basically assume that this is the general division between the individual units that make up our language, or any language for that matter. Right, so let us start with this very simple sentence. I'm trying to briefly explain the main questions to you. Now, if you were to point with your finger to those bits of that sentence that belong to grammar and those bits that belong to the lexicon, which have lexical meaning, and those which have grammatical meaning, you would very likely, and now I'm just doing the work for you, but you will very probably do something like this. Okay, so we'll start with the lexicon on the one side and grammar on the other, and probably I would be part of the lexicon, am would be part of the grammar, try would be part of the lexicon, and so forth. Right, so, and the point is, an important point here is that it's not either or, it's not always binary, but sometimes the distinction between a grammatical and a lexical unit, and by the same token, between grammatical and lexical meaning can be a bit blurred. That's why it's not two distinct categories, lexicon and grammar, but there is a continuum between the two extreme poles of lexicon and grammar. What we're going to do now is to have a closer look at this very particular piece of a grammatical meaning, the li in briefly. And the question for the next couple of slides is going to be, how do dead bodies become suffixes? The word that we know nowadays as li, as the suffix li, began its way, for example, in Old English as a noun, as an independent word, not as a suffix. Here I have one example from Old English. Saseelde he him Sancte Petres Münster, verfera Archbishopa Leek, beburiet sendom. Then he gave him St. Peter's Monastery, where the bodies of the archbishops are buried. Right, so here the word leek is very obviously part of the lexicon. It's a lexical unit. It has the meaning of bodies, corpses. This can also be seen in other Old English words such as leech, sung, funeral song, that is sung when a dead body is put into a grave, leech tun, graveyard, the garden around the dead body, graveyard. But also the same word is still present in other Germanic languages, such as the current German word Leiche, Leichnam, the Dutch word Lijk, Swedish Leek, and so forth, right? And they all mean basically the same thing as the leek word in Old English, dead body, corpse. Right, but now in later Old English, we also find something like this. Ich setje tweeën manlichen beoth on mannes ergum. I tell you that there are two man shapes images of man in the eyes of the man. So this is sort of different. This is exactly the unclear case that I discussed a couple of seconds ago, where it's not as easy to distinguish whether this is really a lexical unit or a grammatical one, right? Because what it basically is something like what we have nowadays in English, with the prevalence of schizophrenia-like symptoms is increased with brain injury, or blah, 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 sitting Buddha-like in the alcove of a cash machine. Right, so here it's not really, it doesn't mean body or shape, something like that, as it did in the first example. Here it means sort of be like something, right? In the form of, right? If someone's sitting Buddha-like somewhere, then he's sitting like a Buddha in the form of Buddha, and so forth. And the same in the Old English example too. Right. If we then go further on, and this is really just 3 examples or 4 examples for more than 1,000 years of development, but just to illustrate things. And now we have the present-day English sentences such as, I'm trying to briefly explain the research code to you, or it takes longer to do things quickly, it's more expensive to do them cheaply. And now here probably everyone would agree that this is grammar. Li here is not a lexical unit, simply intuitively. There are also other cases in present-day English where you don't even have to use them, right? So you will discover the advantages of this package real quick instead of really quickly, but that's just a variation thing. And what the li in this case does is it simply says whatever I'm attached to is an adverb, right? So briefly explain is an adverb, brief is an adjective, right? So li is a suffix in present-day English that makes adverbs out of adjectives. Right. So what we have seen is a development of one word that goes from a independent noun having a lexical meaning to sort of undergoing a intermediate stage and finally ending in something like a categorical marker for adverbs. Right, so from manneslich, the body of a man, through manlich, in the form of a man, to manly, like a man. And the important thing is, it's not the word, the meaning of the word does not jump from one to the other stage. It develops very gradually. And together with the functional changes from lexical meaning to grammatical meaning, what we also see here is a formal change where in the beginning the word was a independent free element, a free word, until it became a bound element, a bound suffix in present-day English. And you can imagine this, how this process works if you, for example, if you imagine a scenario where you order a coffee, right? You are in a cafe and you order a coffee. And you don't only want to drink a coffee, you also want to have a cake, a cookie, right? And you do that, you repeat that, I don't know, every day, every other day, every week. And you always go to the you always go to the cafe to drink a coffee, and you also buy a cookie. 2 independent things that you do. But then slowly the manager of the cafe then already knows you, and they know that you always come and always buy a coffee and a cookie. And you are probably not the only person. And so what they do is that they decide to give you the cookie for free, right? So that for every coffee you buy, you will get an obligatory cookie. You automatically get a cookie if you buy a coffee in that cafe, right? And in the beginning, you bought the cookie because you wanted it. In the end, if it becomes this very small little cookie that you automatically get when you order a coffee, it's something that you don't really, not always. Sometimes you might want that, but not always. But very often you simply eat it because you got it, not because you really wanted it. And this is also something that happens to words, right? So via repetition, via inflation, right? Inflationary use of a word, in this case, leech, and right, it gets used automatically in certain combinations with other verbs, and this leads to something that was in the beginning a free element, independent. It gets, in the end, it loses its independent status, and it has not really a meaning on its own. It has to be combined with other words, and it becomes grammatical. Right. This can also be described in a more technical way by the distinction between referentiality and relationality. On the one hand, lexemes, the units of the lexicon with lexical meaning, have reference, right? So they stand on their own, and they are able to point to non-linguistic reference. Something that you are familiar with from the seminar with Professor von Minken. And they are also very concrete, these constructions, with a concrete meaning, more or less. On the other hand, and this is a prototypical, on the other hand, you have grams, the elements carrying grammatical meaning, which are relational in nature. They cannot refer to non-linguistic reference. What they do is they point to linguistic reference, to other words, and they create relations between other linguistic elements. And these things very often are employed to express more abstract constructions. We'll see what I mean in a minute, but we have already seen it actually here when we talk, right? So man is leech is a lexical meaning with referentiality, and the meaning of leech, body, corpse, is very concrete. Whereas on the other hand, the meaning of adverb is rather abstract, right? And it doesn't really point to anything, only the independent noun, man, that it gets attached to. All right. And now let's have a look at a very brief case study on the grammaticalization. Grammaticalization is the process of word getting from a lexical meaning to a grammatical meaning. And in this case, we're going to have a look at the English word, the Old English verb, willan, with the meaning want, and what it became later. Okay, so we begin, as always, in Old English. Old English would be the English that was used throughout the 8th until the 12th, 13th century, approximately. And in that period, we get sentences such as this. Ne drinks neman alt wien, and wele sona that nieuwe. No man drinks old wine and immediately wants some new. Elided is the noun wine, right? So no man drinks old wine and immediately wants some new wine. In this case, willan, in bold, functions as a full verb followed by a direct object, that new, that new, the new, right? So this is basically something like the meaning of the present-day English verb want. I want a new one, each wille that nieuwe, right? Or you have here, he quest will to that each day, Theodore. He says, what do you want me to do? Again, here is again the verb willan functioning as a full verb that is followed by a full clause introduced by that or that. Right. So what we have here is in Old English we see that the verb willan is very much close to the present-day English meaning of the verb want, something like intention, right? Intention, desire. To want some new wine, what do you want that I do, right? It's not future or anything. And if we take a look at the right-hand side of the slide, we see that we are still, based on this, what we've just seen, we're still in the lexical part of the lexicon grammar continuum. But this has not been always so. In later Old English, and sort of from Old English until more in the Middle English period, we get sentences such as this one. Whither wilt thou gangen, min drichten, ich wille gangen to Rome. Where do you want me to go? My lord, I want to go to Rome. Ich wille mit flode volk a quellan. I intend to kill the people with a flood. Here, willan is used as a full verb, but it has not a clause with that, nor a noun or a noun phrase as its complement, but here it has another verb as its complement. Gangan and aquellan, to go, right? I want you to go, I want you to kill, or I want to kill the people, and so forth. So what we have here is, it is not really, as it was in the back here, intention, desire. Here, we see the meaning is more like intention, willingness, readiness, right? I want to go to Rome. It's sort of, I wish to go to Rome, right? So, but again, still, it doesn't really mean that it doesn't mean future as it does nowadays, but we are more towards the lexicon and moving away from prototypical lexicon, right? Because we have we see that it has to be combined in this case with a concrete full verb, right? So each wille, and then you have to have a combination with another verb. Then if we have a look at how the verb willan was used in Middle English, so the English in the 13th and 15th century, we basically see the same picture as in Old English. So we have sentences such as this: "No will I for her service say you no more." Now I will not say more of the table service. Right? This intention, but also right intention, and this is when implications, presuppositions come into play. If we intend to do something, we imply that we will eventually do that, right? So there is the aspect of futurity in it. Or sentence like that: "And ye will ach wille bestille, he shall tell you who they wrought." And if you will be still, silent for a while, I shall tell you how they acted. Here it is willingness, right? If you will be, if you want to be, or if you remain silent for a while, and so forth. But again, implied is the future meaning, right? So if you want the, again, implication, the conversational implicature is that you do that in the future. And here we have another interesting example. Formon mij hiede his harme, bot unhab ne my heat. For her Herones is touched, twine will it never. For a man may hide his misfortune, but he cannot undo it. For once it is attached there, it will never come apart. And here, the important thing is, this is a prediction about the future. And it cannot be willingness or intention or something like that, because the subject is not a human or an animal, something that would have intentions or free will, something like that, right? So here we are speaking about misfortune that gets attached somewhere. And it is quite obviously not living, right? So this says something different. It will never come apart. So this is a prediction about the future. This is something very new, and this is way more in the realm of grammatical meaning, right? And again, you see, you need here a full verb, right? So it will never come apart, right? Or it will never get loose. Cannot function on its own. Right, and if we then take a look at what happens in early modern English of William Shakespeare, spoken in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, we'll get sentences like this. Well, old man, I will tell you new of your son. Intention, right? I want to tell you, but again, implied is future. I want to tell you, I'm not telling you now, I'm going to tell you in a bit. Or things like this. I'll end my exhortation after dinner. Again, intention, plan, implied future. And here, interestingly, we see that the loss of semantic meaning, of semantic independence, right? Of loss of full lexical meaning is here also accompanied by a phonetic reduction, of a reduction in form, right? It's not willan or will, it's simply only a suffix or a clitic. We have similarly here, yet to supply the ripe wants of my friend, I'll break a custom. Again, willingness with implied futurity. Here again, I fear he will prove the weeping philosopher when he grows old, being so full of unmannerly sadness in his youth. Prediction, right? He will prove whatever. This is not that he has, whoever he is, the person wants to do that or wishes to do that. This is a prediction about the future, not connected to the wants or to the needs of the person speaking. Right. And similarly, we have other cases as well. So what have we seen? If we take a look at the grammaticalization of the verb willan from Old English to present-day English, basically. So we see in the early phases something like nedrin snaman eld win and wheeler sonor that newer. Wheeler sonor that newer wants some new, right? So willan is in Old English used as a full verb with a direct object, and the meaning is want, right? Expressing wishes. Then later on, we get sentences such as ich will gangen to Rome. I want to go to Rome. It's still a full verb, but it gets complemented by another full verb, right? So it's not wish, want to have, but now it means something like intend, right? I intend, and then you have to add what do you intend. That's why you need the second full verb. Even later on, we have sentences like this, right? Will hit never, where the verb willan is a verb that is complemented again by another verb, but importantly, the meaning is prediction, future, right? It doesn't have to do anything with wishes, something like that. And then at the very end, or not really at the very end, but in early modern English period, we'll see sentences such as this: I'll end my exhortations after dinner, where will is the one thing. It's not really a full verb complemented by another full verb, but it's a more or less an auxiliary verb, right? The meaning is here quite clearly something like intention or even future. And future is probably more likely because it's even being made specific by the adverbial phrase after dinner. And furthermore, it's also reduced in form from will to will. All right, so what have we seen? So we've seen a reduction in form, a phonetic reduction from willan to l. We've seen also morphological change, which is something that happens as well, from willan to will, right? The infinitive marker is gets lost. We've also seen a syntactic change, right? So willan that used to be complemented by a full clause, and a noun phrase develops over time to will that is complemented only by verb phrase. And then, most importantly for our discussion right now, we've seen a change of the meaning, right? We go from something like intention, desire, wish, to willingness, readiness, and we end in prediction about the future and eventually simply future. In present-day English, nowadays, we still have sort of all different possibilities. It doesn't mean that if a new meaning of a word gets developed, it doesn't mean that the old ones are lost altogether. There are still remnants of the old ones in present-day English. So if we have sentences such as "I'll put them in the post today," it doesn't necessarily have to be the expression of future, but also simply intention, willingness, and so forth. And most importantly, grammaticalization is a composite process. It doesn't only do one thing, but there are different factors that play a role, right? So the form is changed after the meaning has changed. Right. So what is the message here after this video? The first and most important message is that meaning is not something that is restricted to lexicon, to words such as house, cat, world, and so forth. Grammatical expressions have their own meaning as well. What we've heard a couple of weeks ago from Kirsten Middeker is that also constructions in terms of constructional grammar have their meaning as well. And what we are going to see in our next session, also entire languages, when they serve as a symbol, can also have their meaning, their indexical meaning. What we've also seen is that when a word, where an expression changes its meaning from lexical to grammatical, this can be accompanied by a change in form. But those changes are not necessarily causally linked, right? So that means that we can have changes in form without changes of meaning, and we can have changes in meaning without the changes of form. Another important thing is the so-called the phenomenon of layering, right? So the development of new meanings, and in this case, the grammaticalization of lexical meaning, doesn't erase the old meaning. They all can coexist together. The older lexical and the newer grammatical meaning. And another important thing, the process of grammaticalization. It's not a telic process, meaning it doesn't have a predefined goal that it has to reach and then it ends. Grammaticalization as a part of evolution of languages is something that still goes on, continues, and is never really finished, right? So the development of willan from a full verb to an auxiliary is also, for example, accompanied by the development of the be going to future, and it has also other effects on other parts of the language and so forth, right? So this is not something that only goes from lexical to grammar and then it stops. Continues even in the realm of grammar. Okay, that was it. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day and see you in our live session.